The rain fell in sheets across the broken ridges of the Martian outskirts, where no colony light reached and only the shadows remembered Earth. James Holloway had never seen a creature like her, not in all his tours, not in all the classified files he'd secretly read when drunk and lonesome. She stumbled from the rust-colored mist with blood on her knees and a wound that shimmered green in the hazy twilight. Her skin was pale blue, like a drowned woman's, soft and nearly translucent. Her eyes were too large, too dark, like wells that had seen the end of too many suns. But it wasn't the strangeness of her that stopped James in his tracks. It was the way she dropped to her knees, looked up at him, and begged with a voice that cracked like dry leaves. "Please, please marry me." For a long, stunned moment, all James could do was stare. His hand hovered over the sidearm on his belt, but not out of fear. He wasn't afraid, not really. What scared him wasn't her alien form or the desperate plea that didn't make sense. It was the pain in her voice. Not the kind of pain that bleeds or screams, but the kind that survives everything and still manages to speak. He looked around instinctively, unsure if it was a trap. But there were no others, no ship, no beacon. Just her and the cold Martian. Wind blowing like a forgotten god over the rocks. She spoke again, lower this time, trembling as she collapsed into herself. "They will kill me. If I do not bond, they will rip my mind apart. You are the last, please." Her hands reached out, fingers delicate but covered in strange scars that glowed faintly under the setting sun. She looked half-starved, not just in body but in soul, like hope had been eaten from her bones. James took a hesitant step forward, his boots crunching the red dust beneath. He had seen refugees, soldiers, diplomats. He had seen humans screaming in agony and silence. But nothing had prepared him for this. An alien woman, begging him for a bond he didn't understand, promising only doom if he turned away. Her face was not beautiful in any earthly sense, too angular, too unfamiliar, but something in her expression tore through every barrier he'd built since the war. She wasn't crying. Her species might not even have tears. But she looked like she should be. He dropped to one knee, not knowing why. "I don't understand," he said, voice hoarse from disuse. "Bond, Mary? Why me?" She blinked slowly, her breath ragged. "You are human, that is enough. They fear your kind, not for war, for what you feel, for what you give." James frowned. The storm behind her was growing strange electric colors rising from the eastern ridge. No colony storm systems registered that kind of weather. "Who are they?" Her mouth opened to speak, but she winced hard, clutching the side of her head. A pulse of faint light rippled across her skin, and she gasped, almost like something inside her was trying to scream through her bones. She struggled to stand, but collapsed again. No time. "You must decide. Touch me, bind me, or I vanish, and they find another. And the cycle never ends." James looked down at her hand. It shook like a dying candle, and all he could think was that she'd come this far, in pain, hunted by something not yet named, to ask him, a broken man, an abandoned outpost, to be the one thing that might save her. Not a warrior, not a doctor, not a scientist, just a man who could feel. And though nothing in his training or logic made sense of it, he reached out and took her hand. The moment their skin touched, something ancient and electric passed between them. Not pleasure, not pain. A deep recognition, like finding a melody you didn't know was lost. And for the first time in years, James felt something that didn't come from war or survival. He felt needed, not as a soldier, not as a tool, but as a human being. The sky pulsed once, distant and ominous, and somewhere behind the storm, something ancient noticed. Asterisk, asterisk, James Holloway had seen death stare him in the face 1,000 times, yet nothing had ever shaken him like the fragile weight of that alien hand in his. Her fingers wrapped around his like vines, seeking warmth, trembling with a mixture of fear and something else, trust, maybe, or desperation deep enough to mimic it. The contact sent a strange warmth crawling up his arm, not painful, not invasive, but heavy, emotional, like 1,000 silent voices pressing memories against his skin. He staggered slightly, breath hitching, as unfamiliar flashes tore through his mind, a prison of white light, alien faces without kindness, a scream that echoed without sound. They weren't his memories, they were hers. Somehow, through the dawn she had begged for, she was sharing the story she could not speak. He fell to one knee, panting, sweat rolling down his neck, despite the Martian cold. She didn't move. Her eyes watched him with solemn intensity, as if measuring how much of her pain he could carry. He remembered combat, remembered dragging a wounded friend through a battlefield while blood soaked the soil around them. That had been agony. This was worse. Because this was invisible, intimate. She wasn't sharing wounds of the body. She was showing him her soul, and it was splintered, cracked, and so full of quiet sorrow that it made James want to scream just to make the silence stop. When the pressure eased, he stumbled back and gasped. What the hell was that? He rasped, gripping his knees for support. She said nothing, only watched. Her mouth moved, but no words came. James realized she was afraid he would turn away now, after knowing too much. She had dropped, her entire being into his hands with the faith of a cornered animal. And he had every right to walk away, but he didn't. He looked up at her, face lined with dust and a new kind of understanding. You were in a cage, he said softly. They kept you like some experiment? For how long? Her throat quivered. Before she managed to whisper, 32 cycles. I was bred to be a seer. I see possibilities, I predict. They used me to track warpaths until I broke. Her voice caught. They call it echo collapse. It means I began to feel the outcomes, not just see them. That's forbidden in the Aurelian hierarchy. Emotion is a defect to them. James frowned. So they tortured you because you felt? She nodded. I saw too many deaths. I felt everyone. They wanted numbers, not empathy. He cursed under his breath. So you escaped? I ran. I ran through portals they couldn't seal in time. I found your kind by accident, but when I touched your mind, her eyes grew distant, haunted. I saw something I had never known before. A capacity for sorrow without surrender. You feel pain and still walk toward it. You mourn, and yet you love again. You fall, and you choose to get up. They fear that. Your kind is terrifying. James chuckled bitterly, still shaking. We're not as noble as you think. We fight each other more than we help. We destroy things we don't understand. But you try, she said softly. You try. The silence between them stretched, filled with wind and distant thunder from the strange storm crawling across the Martian sky. James stared at her. He still didn't know her name. Still didn't know what marrying her meant, biologically, politically, cosmically. But he knew something else, something that had settled in his gut the moment he touched her. If he walked away now, she wouldn't survive. She had reached the edge of her strength, and he couldn't be the final betrayal. What do I call you? He asked gently, her lips parted. My true name would break your voice, but I've heard humans give names for comfort. If I must, you may call me Lira. Lira, he repeated, and something about the way her head tilted told him it mattered. That giving her a human name was a kindness that stitched a little of her brokenness back together. He stood slowly, eyes never leaving hers. Then I'll say, Lira, I'll help you. Whatever this bond means, I'll carry it. Not because I understand it, but because I felt what you showed me. She closed her eyes, as if in silent relief. They will come, James. When they sense the bond took hold, they will come to erase it. And me, and you. He nodded once. Then let them come. For the first time, her mouth curled into a fragile expression, not quite a smile. More like a flicker of something ancient trying to remember what hope tasted like. Above them, the sky cracked with alien lightning, and the horizon opened with a rift that did not belong to any known physics. The war for a soul had begun. The Martian nights were bitter and long, the kind that made silence feel like a living thing, crawling through the bones and breathing down the neck. James Holloway sat beside the alien woman Lira beneath a jagged overhang of rusted stone that shielded them from the howling wind. A flickering portable heater cast shadows on the rocks, and in that trembling light, her skin seemed almost human. Almost. He had patched the cuts on her arms with old field med gel, even though her body resisted it strangely, sealing in ways that didn't match human biology. She hadn't spoken much since the storm passed, hadn't needed to. The bond between them, it was more than he'd expected. Sometimes it felt like she was inside him, nudging a memory or catching his breath in her lungs. Other times it was like he carried her pain in pieces, like shards of broken glass tucked into his soul. But stranger still, he didn't mind. Lira watched him with eyes that saw too much. They never blinked long, and they never judged. She had a quiet stillness about her that made James feel like a child again, staring at the stars, wondering if they had hearts. And now one sat beside him, hurt and hunted, but still daring to hope. That quiet hope drew something out of him, something deeper than duty. You lost someone? She said suddenly, her voice soft, not a question but a knowing. He didn't answer right away. He stared at the heater's flickering core. The memory came like old fire hot in the chest, sharp behind the eyes. Yeah, he whispered. My wife, Naomi. We were both stationed on Europa, civilian translator, brilliant mind. Smarter than me in every damn way. She died in a containment breach. Airlock fault. I was supposed to be there. I switched shifts. Lyra's hand moved slowly toward his. She didn't grasp it. She just let her fingers hover nearer, like an invitation without pressure. You carry her still, she murmured. James nodded. I think part of me died with her. The part that believed in beginnings. Lira tilted her head, curious. And yet, you took mine. That stung, but not in a cruel way. It cut like truth always does. He hadn't meant to. He didn't know what the bond truly meant when he took her hand. But now he felt it, a tether that ran deeper than flesh, deeper than blood. When she stirred in her sleep, he felt the echo. When he wept in silence, she felt the weight. Two beings, impossibly different, forced into intimacy, not by love, not by romance, but by survival, and slowly, by choice. She turned her gaze back to the dark ridge beyond their shelter. Where I come from, bonding is forbidden with outsiders, not for purity, not for power, but because we're taught that humans feel too much, that your emotions infect, that they corrupt logic. James gave a dry laugh. Well, they're not wrong. But what they call corruption, she said, I call awakening. She looked back at him. When I fled, I didn't plan to survive. I just wanted to die on my own terms. But then I saw you. Just a man, cleaning tools alone in a dead outpost. So ordinary. So full. You grieved, that you stood. You spoke to no one, but still whistled when you worked. That song, it echoed across the rocks. And in that sound, I felt something I'd never known. James swallowed hard. You heard that? Lira smiled faintly. It was the first human thing I ever heard. A broken tune from a broken man. But it reached farther than you think. He looked at her then, really looked, past the alien skin, past the wounds, past the silence. He saw someone who had lived in terror for years, someone who had risked everything just to find something real. And somehow, in a universe full of empires and extinction, she had landed here, in his world, in his hands. I don't know what this bond really means, Lira, he said finally, but I'm not going to leave you behind, not to them, not to anyone. Her eyes gleamed faintly with something that shimmered like stars behind clouds. She leaned closer, just slightly, and rested her head against his shoulder. There was no romance in the gesture, only trust. A trust hard-earned and softly given. The wind howled again, louder this time. But inside their tiny bubble of warmth and shared breath, it faded to a whisper. That night, they didn't speak again. They simply sat in the stillness, two beings from distant galaxies, bonded by pain, loss, and something that might someday grow into more. Not love, not yet, but something rarer. Understanding. And far above them, beyond the planet's thin atmosphere. Ships stirred in silent darkness. The hunt had begun. Asterisk, asterisk. The silence of the Martian dawn was shattered by the soundless ripple of displaced air. It wasn't a noise James could hear with his ears, but he felt it in his bones like gravity had hiccuped. He jerked awake, reaching for the rifle by his side, instincts firing faster than thought. Lira was already upright, her body tense, eyes locked on the sky. A shimmer spread across the atmosphere like oil on water. Something had entered orbit, something not human. He stood beside her, the weapon humming faintly in his hands, though he knew it was useless against whatever had come. They're here, aren't they? Lira nodded once. The hierarchs have sent a Warden-class mine vessel. They know the bond held. They've come to unmake it. James squinted into the sky, heart thudding like a drum against his ribs. What does that mean? Unmake? She hesitated. They will erase my mind. And yours. Not just memories, identity. They view bonded minds as viral, unpredictable, dangerous. You and I, we are anomaly code. If they let us live, others might follow. James stepped closer, anger rising like fire. Then we run, but Lira shook her head. No place left to run, not in this system. They've already breached local space folds. They've locked the atmosphere. A deep, low vibration rolled through the dust like a growl. James looked up and saw it then, a shadow so massive it distorted the sky. The Warden ship wasn't like anything humanity had ever built. It didn't gleam or flash. It loomed. A living thing shaped like a crescent wound in the sky, pulsing with quiet malice. And from its underbelly, 3 spears of blue light descended, touching ground a few kilometers away. Landing parties. James turned to Lira, his throat dry. Tell me the truth. Why did they create you? Why do they fear us this much? Lyra's face was pale, haunted, but resolute. The hierarchy has ruled for 10,000 cycles. Cold logic, absolute control. Emotions are kept isolated, buried. Seers like me are bred to calculate threat patterns, to predict rebellion before it breathes. But when I bonded with your kind through captured specimens, I didn't just see futures. I felt them. Felt human sacrifice. Human mercy. I began to choose outcomes, not calculate them. I wanted to save lives, not just win battles. Her voice cracked slightly. They called it a disease. Empathy. James blinked. They called empathy a disease. To them it is. Empathy gives power to the small, to the weak. It makes soldiers question orders. Makes rulers fear the governed. It unravels obedience. James sat hard on a rock, staring into the rising dust clouds in the distance. The landers were moving, coming for them. So you didn't just run from them, you defected. Because of what you saw in us, Lira nodded. I saw a species that breaks, bleeds, mourns, and keeps going. I saw a species that loses everything and still chooses to care. You are the worst killers in the galaxy, but also the only ones who grieve for the dead they didn't even know. James chuckled bitterly. Yeah, we're pretty messed up. She stepped closer. But that's what makes you beautiful. You feel pain and still choose to love. Do you understand what kind of weapon that is to a race that's built their empire on fear? He stood then, straightening. The fear hadn't left him, but something else had taken root now. A fire he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Then they're right to be afraid, he said. Lira looked at him, something unreadable flickering behind her eyes. There's more, she said quietly. This bond between us, it's not just emotional. It's quantum, entangled. The hierarchs didn't just design us to see the future. They created a way to anchor it. A bonded pair can reshape possibility together. But it requires a choice. What kind of choice? James asked, voice low. Lira looked toward the dust rising beyond the ridge. We either surrender now and die slowly, or we merge the bond completely. Mind to mind, no secrets. No walls. If we do, I can channel what I see into you. Give you the future before it happens. Just long enough to turn it. But it will cost us. You'll carry me, and I'll carry you. For as long as we live. James was silent. That kind of intimacy, he had never imagined it. To be seen that deeply, not just the good parts, but the broken ones. The selfishness, the guilt, the scars he'd buried even from himself. It was terrifying, but so was dying for nothing. He looked at her, this alien woman who had risked everything. To feel, who had chosen him not for power, but because he was wounded, because he felt. And in her gaze, he saw not weakness, but revolution. He stepped forward and reached for her hands again. Let's do it. She hesitated only a moment, then took his hands. The world shifted. The air around them pulsed as if exhaling, and then the dust rose, and so did they. The bond was no longer a silent thread between them. It had become a river of stars roaring through James's mind, ancient and wild. As soon as he gripped Lyra's hands, it was as if his soul had been pulled through the eye of a storm and scattered across a million timelines. He saw flashes, possible futures, twisted and beautiful. He saw himself burned to ash in a desert of glass, saw Lira disassembled by clinical hands, her mind harvested. But he also saw, victory brief, blinding moments of defiance that cracked. The cold machinery of her former masters. It was too much to bear, too much to understand. But he felt her beside him in the chaos, anchoring him, her presence a constant heartbeat amid the storm. Her memories curled through his own like smoke her birth inside a sterile tank. Her first vision, her first rebellion, her first taste of guilt when she let a rebel cell escape because she'd felt their desperation. It wasn't just knowledge. He was being given, it was her, laid bare and without defense, and she took his in return. James tried to hide the darker parts of himself, the things no soldier ever wanted to admit. How he'd prayed for death after Naomi, how he'd almost taken his own life in the silent cold of this very outpost, gun in hand, mouth dry from hours of indecision, but Lira didn't look away. She held that truth with tenderness, not pity, and somehow that acceptance hurt more than judgment ever could. They saw each other not through eyes, but through everything. When the bond finally stabilized, James dropped to one knee, gasping, drenched in sweat, though the air was freezing. God, he muttered, how are we still alive? Lira helped him up, though she was just as shaken, her hands trembling. Because we chose it, she said. The hierarchs don't believe in choice, but it's the one thing that makes us real. Then the scream hit them, not from above, but inside. A pulse from the warden vessel blasted across the Martian surface. Not as sound, but as thought. A command. A summons. James clutched his head as the voice sliced into his mind like a blade made of ice and certainty. It spoke in no language, yet he understood it. Surrender. The bond is unnatural. You defy the design. Compliance is mercy. Lira convulsed beside him, her knees hitting the ground as she clutched her skull. They're inside, she gasped. They've found our signal. They're hacking the bond. They're trying to overwrite. James dropped beside her, gripping her shoulders. Lira, look at me, look at me. He pressed his forehead to hers, forcing focus, forcing connection. They can't overwrite what we choose. You told me that. She sobbed once, not from pain, but from the crushing pressure of 1,000 cold minds bearing down on her. I'm scared, she whispered. James, I'm so scared. He held her tighter, whispering, me too. But we're not alone anymore. That's the difference. The ground began to shake. Not violently, rhythmically. Steps, machines. The first of the hierarch landing drones crested the ridge, tall as buildings, moving with insect-like grace. They walked not to intimidate, but to harvest. Behind them, 6 smaller figures emerged. Aurelian enforcers, Lyra's kin, only without soul. Silver-robed and mask-faced, each carrying rods that pulsed with anti-thought energy. James felt Lira recoil even before he saw them. They were my sisters, she said hollowly, before I failed. Before they watched me scream and did nothing. James raised his rifle, not to shoot, not yet, but to stand. They come for you? Lira shook her head. They come for us. Our minds are now one. They won't allow a human to carry their defect into the stars. The lead enforcer raised a hand. James heard the command in his mind again, cold and final. Surrender the seer. The human may be erased painlessly. James laughed, dark and furious. Painless? You think that's what I want? He stepped forward, placing himself between the enforcers and Lira. You took everything from her. You hunted her because she chose to feel. You built an empire on silence, on obedience, on fear. And now, you're afraid of us? The enforcer's mask tilted. Another pulse hit James's mind, sharper this time, digging for weakness. But he stood his ground, sweat beading at his brow. Lira rose behind him, her glow returning, her hands sparking with energy no human science could explain. She reached out and touched his back. Her strength flowed into him. Their bond pulsed with power. Careful, she said softly. You're starting to sound like a seer. James smiled without humor. Nah, just a pissed-off husband. The enforcers moved forward, and James raised the gun, knowing it wouldn't be enough, but the bond might be. They had one chance, and they took it ***. The world stood still the moment the first enforcer moved. It was not a run, not a charge, but a glide. Swift and inhuman, a blur of silver and pulsing light. James raised his rifle out of instinct, but his hands were steady, not because of training, but because Lira was there behind him, her breath synchronizing with his, her thoughts flickering in his chest like embers waiting for wind. He fired, and the pulse round slammed into the enforcer's chest, dispersing against an energy shield with a flash of gold. The figure staggered but did not fall. The other 5 closed in quickly behind, forming a wide arc, herding, encircling. They weren't trying to kill. Not yet. They were reclaiming property. James gritted his teeth, the rifle overheating in his grip. They're not afraid of me, he growled. They think I'm just a meat shield. They're wrong, Lira whispered, stepping forward, her body humming with that same impossible current. You are something they've never prepared for a human who feels and won't let go. Then the sky ripped open. A beam of dark light fell from the Warden-class ship above. But it wasn't light as humans understood it. It was pure force. Will turned into geometry, cutting across the Martian surface like a blade. It struck the ridge behind them and reduced it to red mist, the air screaming in protest. James fell to one knee, shielding Lira, though she barely flinched. They're cleansing the terrain, she said, eyes distant, erasing possible outcomes. They want no record we were ever here. James looked up at the towering beam with horror. That thing could level a city. They don't want cities. They want control. She turned her eyes toward the enforcers. But I've seen another outcome, one where we make them bleed. James looked into her eyes, then show me. The bond surged like fire in his veins. In a flash, his mind was filled with precise moments, not memories, not visions, but choices. If he moved here, dodged there, if he pulled the enforcer toward Lira at the exact angle she predicted, they could create a fracture in the field. A disruption. Just enough to break through. The enforcer struck. The first darted left, blade arm gleaming, slashing low. James ducked a half-second before the strike came, not because he saw it, but because Lira had felt it coming. The second fired a thought disruption pulse aimed at Lyra's neural center. She spun just as it fired, her energy flaring, absorbing it and hurling it back in a shriek of light. The enforcer's mask cracked open with a hiss like escaping steam. Not dead but wounded. For the first time, they showed uncertainty. They had made a mistake. James surged forward, striking the staggered enforcer in the chest with the butt of his rifle, driving the figure back into another. Lyra's hands danced beside him, fingers tracing symbols into the air, symbols of resistance, of rebirth. Ancient seer sigils, long outlawed. You cannot silence what has awakened. She shouted, and her voice rang with something older than language, older than even fear. The enforcers faltered. James turned, breathing hard. "We're doing this. We can win." Lira didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the ship above. "No," she said softly. "Not win. Change. That's the only outcome worth chasing." And suddenly she stepped away from him. "Lira." But she lifted her hand, palm facing the sky, and her body began to rise, slow and weightless, surrounded by a storm of light and dust and memory. Her mind was open into them, to the wardenship, to the minds that had once commanded her and now feared what she had become. James screamed for her to stop, to come back down, but she only smiled at him, sad and fierce. "They will never understand love," she whispered. "But they will feel it." Then she pushed. A blast of psychic force erupted from her core, not of violence, but of raw human emotion, grief, rage, compassion, defiance. Every memory James had given her. Every heartbeat they had shared. Every echo of Naomi, of songs whistled. In solitude, of pain endured with clenched fists and sleepless nights. Lira gave them all away, poured their bond into the sky like a river breaking its dam, and the warden screamed. Not in sound, but in collapse. Its beam faltered. Its shape twisted, buckled under a force it had never prepared for. Human will. The enforcers shrieked in fractured tones, retreating, minds burning as Lyra's projection spread into them like light flooding a dark cathedral. James dropped to his knees, overwhelmed by the raw flood of emotion. He could feel her still, but she was drifting farther and farther. "Lira," he cried, reaching upward. Her voice echoed in his chest. "I'm not dying, James. I'm becoming what they feared. I'd be a bridge between worlds, between hearts, between what is and what can be." And then she was gone. Only silence remained. The warden vessel cracked, whisting, retreating into the upper atmosphere, damaged in a way no weapon could cause. The enforcers vanished in a blink of phase light. They had failed. And more terrifying than defeat was the knowledge that feeling had undone them. James remained in the dust, alone beneath a sky that no longer hated him. The war, he realized, was not over, but something had changed forever. For days, James wandered the silent wastelands, waiting for her voice to return. The Martian sky was calm now, deceptively calm, and the red dust no longer carried the thunder of alien ships or the tremble of machines meant to erase him. But Lira was gone, or at least not where she had been. Her body, her touch, her eyes that had once held whole galaxies of memory, none of it remained. And yet she was everywhere. At first, he doubted it. He thought maybe the bond had snapped and left behind echoes, phantom warmth where there was only cold. But then the heater unit he'd thought broken flickered on when he spoke her name aloud. The solar panels realigned themselves at dawn without command. He began to dream in languages he had never learned, dream of her thoughts, not just his. Some nights he heard her laughter, distant and fleeting, but not imagined, never imagined. The outpost had become something else. Alive, in a quiet way. The rocks seemed to whisper when he walked past. The soil carried a strange warmth where she had last stood. He had become part of something he could never fully explain. Not to command, not to scientists, not even to himself. The official report he filed would mention an energy anomaly, possibly a failed probe interaction. He listed no combat engagement, no hostiles, no survivors. That was the story Earth wanted, clean, contained. But the truth was still humming in his blood. Sometimes, when he sat beside the ruined ridge where she had lifted into the sky, he would close his eyes and whisper, "Lira, are you still out there?" And though she never answered in words, he felt her, a warmth behind his ribs, a memory that wasn't fading, a promise made in the crucible of fear and pain, still holding steady. She had not died. She had become. Beneath the Martian surface, he began rebuilding not just the outpost, but something more. A place where others might come, refugees, seekers. The broken and lost like he had been. He wired new antennas, not for communication, but to listen, to sense anomalies. He studied the bond's lingering data, not for power, but for understanding. And when asked why he stayed in exile, why he turned down every promotion and reassignment, he gave no explanation. How could he? How do you explain love that transcends the physical? A connection so deep it rewrote two beings down to their atoms? James never bonded with anyone again, not in the way he had with Lira. But he wasn't alone, not anymore. People came. Others like her came, quietly, secretly. And every time one of them looked at him with eyes wide from fear, he met them with the same soft resolve Lira had once seen in him. You're safe here. You matter. You are not broken, and they stayed. The years passed, and the hierarchy never returned. Perhaps they were too afraid. Perhaps Lira had spread farther than even they could follow. Or maybe they learned the one truth they had spent millennia denying, that love, once awakened, does not go quietly back to sleep. Sometimes, late at night, James would sit on the highest ridge and sing, nothing in tune, nothing complex, just the same old tune he'd once whistled to himself in the dark. Before her, before everything. Now he sang it not out of sorrow, but as a beacon. A signal, a memory-made sound, and one night, as the stars shimmered in waves above, the wind carried a hum that joined his voice, not human, not alien, her, a harmony. Only he could feel. He smiled, and a tear fell from his cheek, it landed on the dust, and the dust bloomed with light. Lira was not gone. She was in the seed of every future they had dared to imagine. She was in him, and because of that, the galaxy would never be the same.